Hey guys, hope you all are doing really well. I'm really excited today. More excited than usual because we're going to be focusing on temperate forests. Now, if you live in New York and especially Western New York, you should be familiar with these temperate forests. These are the first forests I really started to truly study and start to understand. So I hold these biomes very near and dear to my heart. I love these forests. So without further ado, let's get into these temperate biomes. Again, this is lecture 16, still in unit 4, looking at all these different biomes. And if we could take a quick second to just appreciate this really cool picture that I took. Now, this is at Chestnut Ridge County Park in Orchard Park. So 40 minutes away, you can go into this really cool ecosystem and see a whole, diversity of different plant species, different animal species. You can go down to the stream and see aquatic species. On one side of the ravine, conifers tend to dominate, where the other one is more of a mixed deciduous forest, and more so dominated by those broadleaf deciduous trees. So in one, county park, you can see just a really great diversity of organisms, and that's why temperate forests are so cool. Other biomes have, just one assemblage of organisms, but temperate forests, temperate biomes, there's a lot of heterogeneity, like I was just explaining. You can go into one of these temperate forests and see just these little pockets of totally different microbiomes, which I love, and it's just really cool. Now, this picture I took in really early spring a few years ago, and I love just the composition of it. I love the really dark bark of these eastern hemlock trees. I love the fog. Now, this was actually like a 60-degree day. It was actually really warm. But if you catch, the right time of the year, you can hike in the snow with short sleeves on. And it was kind of one of those hikes, and I just love this picture. I love this snow. I love the dark, contrasting bark. In the distance, you can see these yellow leaves, and those are beech saplings. So beech trees tend to hold on to their leaves. They don't necessarily drop all their leaves. Their leaves actually protect their buds, which allow them to put out fresh leaves in the springtime. So these yellow leaves are from beech trees. Beech trees are awesome. And if you ever go to Chestnut Ridge, you might realize that, hey, why is this park called Chestnut Ridge Park? There's no chestnut trees. Well, that's because chestnut trees are pretty much extinct now, because this fungus was brought from Asia to North America, and this fungus that co-evolved with Asian chestnut trees kills American chestnut just like that. So Asian chestnut trees, because they co-evolved with this chestnut blight, they can withstand those interactions. But when you bring this invasive fungus to North America, it caused the demise of the chestnut tree. So no longer is the American chestnut the dominant tree of Chestnut Ridge. It has thus been replaced by many other tree species that we find in Western New York. And we have this amazing hemlock tree that, you guessed it, is also on the down because of yet another invasive species. But it might actually have found a little bit of refugia this north. So I'll get into that when we get into invasive species, I believe next lecture, actually. So just a little bit of preface when it comes to Chestnut Ridge County Park. I just really love this picture, though. A little bit of review. Last lecture, we learned about 4 ways organism exchanges heat. You have conduction, which is direct contact with the surface. Convection, a fluid moving over the organism's body. Radiation from the sun, and then evaporation. So as this iguana is breathing, moisture is actually leaving its lungs and is actually carrying heat away. Now, we sweat. Other mammals might pant. Actually, interestingly enough, many mammals don't have sweat glands covering their bodies like we do. So they're going to sweat through their mouths, like panting. But yeah, those are the 4 ways an organism exchanges heat. Some more review. We have ectothermic organisms that their internal temperature matches the outside temperature pretty much. Obviously, they can have different behaviors. They can, if it's too hot, they can go under some shade or some type of burrow. If they're too cold, they can find a dark surface and bask in the sun. Oppositely, we have endotherms, mammals and birds. They actually spend energy to maintain their own body temperature. And you only see internal body temperatures changing when it gets really cold out. When it gets really cold, obviously they too will change their behavior, huddle up in a little ball to reduce their surface area. They'll maybe huddle together. They will shiver, and those are some different behavioral changes that both of these organisms will take part in. So know the different examples of thermoregulation. I just talked about behavioral responses. We have cooling by evaporative heat loss, sweating and panting. Circulatory adaptations, we learn about vasoconstriction and vasodilation, and then insulation. So endotherms are always going to have a layer of insulation, whether that be fur or hair or blubber or feathers, right? So those are all forms of insulation. Besides animals, we learn about plants and their adaptations to conserve water and maintain the proper temperature for optimal photosynthesis. So in the desert, these plants get bombarded with sunlight. They get too hot. If their photosynthetic machinery gets too hot, they won't be able to photosynthesize. So desert adapted plants have adapted to their environment by evolving reflective leaves. Their leaves can reflect light through different waxes, or sometimes they produce these trichomes or plant hairs. So I actually have a plant right here that is endemic to parts of Africa, I believe South Africa, and you have, I think they're called quillworts. You can see this leopard print right here. This is a great example of a reflective leaf. So if you look closely, the silvery part is actually very reflective. And I've seen this plant do a little bit better. It's a little bit cold and it doesn't have enough sunlight over here, but it's a really hardy plant and it will make it. It did much better in my sunroom, but I had to take all my plants in from my sunroom because the sunroom gets too cold in the winter at this latitude. The reduced leaf area or leaf angle, we learn about different cacti and how cactus, they don't have true leaves. The actual column is their photosynthetic structure. And then the leaf angle, if you remember the snake plant behind me, leaves that stand straight up do not receive as much sunlight as a horizontal leaf, which is going to get bombarded by sunlight. You have deep roots and also a large root to shoot ratio. So most of the biomass is actually underground in many of these desert adapted plants. Water storage organs, the roots, and the if you watch that video on the saguaro cactus, which you should have, the actual column of the plant greatly enlarges to store water. Drought deciduous leaves, there's many acacia trees that do that. That drop their leaves when water becomes very limited, and then just an annual life cycle. Some plants avoid all of these negative interactions just by sprouting right when rain comes and carrying out their life cycle in just a matter of weeks. And then they will drop seed and then die. So that's a really cool and simple adaptation in these demanding places. Now, from the first lecture in this unit, we talked about this term, which should be a reoccurring theme, and we will talk about that more today. Spatial heterogeneity. Resources are not spread out evenly in nature. Remember this almondro tree. Almondro trees are very rare, and they are randomly, you find them randomly throughout these tropical and subtropical rainforests in Central America. Now, when you do find one of these trees, they are biodiversity hotspots. You can see this is a picture I took. These macaws, these Montezuma oropendulos, these blackbirds with the golden tails. And for many reasons, this is a great example of spatial heterogeneity, right? They provide homes for many of these birds. They provide foods for these birds and other organisms. And if you remember, the almondro tree is a legume, and legumes, they input nitrogen. They actually fix nitrogen using bacteria, mutualistic bacteria in their roots. So for all these reasons, these are great. This is a great example of spatial heterogeneity. And remember, you get fined $100,000 if you get caught cutting down one of these trees. So this next figure we actually did not look at yet. I really like this figure. This is some new material, and this describes two terms, these two underlined terms here, resistance and resilience. So these are two red terms. And I did briefly talk about this, but we didn't actually have a slide. So here's a slide. Now, resistance is shown by this blue line. So we all know that there are perturbances throughout ecosystems, whether it be human perturbances by, deforestation or pest disturbances. There's different beetles, like in that one homework assignment that we had, the pine boring beetles, for example, of the West. We learn about those too. So basically, there are going to be disturbances that ecosystems are going to encounter. And I didn't even mention forest fires. And I actually have a unit dedicated to forest fires and forest management. But disturbances occur. So before we actually get into what resistance and resilience actually means, we have to better understand the axes. Again, always look at the axes. We have ecosystem function as a function of time. So what exactly is an ecosystem function? Well, an ecosystem function can be more than one thing. Usually when we talk about the functioning of an ecosystem, it is the flow of energy through that ecosystem, or the storage of carbon of that ecosystem. So those are two ecosystem functions that we can talk about. So during a disturbance, a really heavy disturbance, let's say a forest fire, all of a sudden, let's just say the ecosystem function on this figure is carbon storage. If all these trees die, there's going to be no carbon storage until the trees, seeds germinate and trees start to mature and then start to sequester more and more carbon, right? So hopefully that helps you better understand ecosystem functioning. Carbon storage is a great one. And, net primary productivity, measuring how much photosynthesis is occurring, which is really closely related to, carbon storage. Also, like the cycling of nutrients is also a ecosystem function. So basically, there are disturbances throughout nature that happen, and there are these terms: ecological resistance and ecological resilience. So if an ecosystem or biome is very resistant, it is going to resist change when it encounters a disturbance. So here we have a very resistant ecosystem. So a disturbance occurs. Rocco wants to come up here. A disturbance occurs, and the ecosystem, actually the function does not change, right? However, we have resilient ecosystems. So this red resilient ecosystem, it is not as resistant, but it is very resilient. So resilience is if an ecosystem can bounce back, right? So yes, a disturbance occurred, the ecosystem functioning went down, but this ecosystem luckily was very resilient and it bounced right back to its original state, to its original functioning. Now this top ecosystem, even though it is rather resistant, right? A really crazy disturbance came by, and it does not have very good resilience, so its state actually changed. So this slide suggests that biodiversity, biomes that have a lot of biodiversity, are gonna have more ecological resistance and resilience, which makes a lot of sense because these organisms, if you have all these different organisms, you're going to have organisms that carry out a similar role. So let's just say you have one woodpecker. If that woodpecker goes extinct, right, no longer in that biome where that woodpecker lived will trees die, and you won't have, basically the ecological functioning of woodpeckers is, to allow different insects and different organisms to live in dead, hollow trees. We'll get into that later in this lecture, but if you only have one species of woodpecker in an ecosystem, then as soon as that woodpecker is removed from that ecosystem, then there's, the ecosystem is going to change its state. So there is that. Again, you can go on and on and on. Let's say you only have one legume in your ecosystem. That legume goes, locally extinct, and no longer do you have an organism that fixes nitrogen. So biodiversity clearly enhances resistance and resilience. So on to this figure again. We are looking at temperate forests today. Temperate forests have a relatively large, actually it looks like some of the largest area on this figure. A relatively moderate precipitation and average moderate temperatures. So again, love this figure. You know those two abiotic factors, and you know what biome you're going to be looking at. Temperate forests can be evergreen or deciduous. Usually there are mixed deciduous forests. So you have many of these forests that are grouped by the dominant tree type. Broadleaf deciduous trees. Deciduous trees, again, lose their leaves seasonally, or evergreen or coniferous trees. Conifers are cone-bearing trees. So your spruce, your pines, your cedars, your hemlocks, your trees with needles. When we look at this figure, this graph, you can see that precipitation always outweighs evaporation, so there's a bounty of available water. you get this bell-shaped curve, which again highlight the tilt of the Earth and Earth's seasonality. And then you get, most of the months. So 9 months out of the year are going to be above freezing. Depending on the year, sometimes we have 4 frozen months, but many times it's just 3. We will see where we are at this year. Now, something we should know is that temperate biomes are studied immensely. Now, many universities of the world are around temperate forests. So that's why these forests are studied so immensely, is that, researchers at a university, they don't have to go far to study temperate ecosystems, right? So because of this, we have a rich scientific literature about these temperate biomes. Now, again, looking at this GIF, I love this GIF. You see the seasonality of the planet. The east coast of our country is dominated by this habitat, temperate and broadleaf mixed forests, right? So you can see this color coincides with this blue over here and throughout Europe as well. So a very heavily studied biome. Now, these occur throughout the world where rainfall is plentiful in these mid-latitudes, and if the forest is actually dominated by deciduous trees, clearly there was going to be an influx of leaf litter every year. So the loss of green chlorophyll pigments can produce brilliant colors in the autumn months. We know that. And at lower latitudes, broadleaf forests may be evergreen or drought deciduous. So in the south, you actually have oak species that change and go through this autumn coloration during the drier months. So kind of like the trees we learn about in desert biomes. In southern states, you have certain oaks, for example, that lose their leaves when it's dry. Coniferous forests are going to grow in a wide range of environmental conditions. They often occur where moisture is limited. So there is a broad range of precipitation in temperate biomes. And you might think of, if in a cold climate, there's all this snow, there's clearly a lot of precipitation, but it's not so much about the amount of precipitation, it's about available water. Frozen water or ice is not available to plants. So many people fail to realize that. Frozen water cannot be sucked up plant roots. So even though there is a lot of precipitation, many times it's not available to the plant. Coniferous trees have these waxy leaves that we call needles, and those needles actually help reduce moisture loss. So the thick waxy leaves actually reduces the amount of water escaping to the atmosphere, so thus they hold on to water. Very good. This next term I want us to realize is leaf senescence. So leaf senescence is when the seasonal changes ensue. A plant has many resources that it allocates to its leaves that are expensive for the plant to produce or find in its soil habitat. So instead of just dropping its leaf and all of the expensive products that it allocates to those leaves to carry out photosynthesis, it actually sequesters some of those nutrients and some of those products back into the tree, stores it in the trunk. so that it can then put those products back into the leaves as it produces new leaves in the spring. So while the leaf is still attached, leaf nutrients are going to be sucked back into the plant's body and then can be used for something else, usually for leaf production in the following growing season. So these are leaves that I found, and you could see this one was still attached. So much senescence occurred that you actually had like a transparent leaf. And you could actually see here the leaf senescence occurring right on the veination of the actual leaf itself. So if I were to ask you this question, when do you guys think mushroom season peaks? So think of what fungi consume. And you should remember the word saprotroph or saprophytic, the decomposition of dead organic matter. Think about leaves and fall and all this dead organic matter. So mushroom season peaks in early and mid fall, where there are warm temperatures and a lot of detritus or dead fallen plant materials. So plant tradeoffs in temperate biomes. Let's talk about these tradeoffs. So in these biomes, again, you have conifer trees and you have deciduous trees. So conifer trees are going to have a lower photosynthetic output than deciduous trees, but they can photosynthesize throughout the year. Yeah, they really can. So let's say you have a warmer day in the winter and you get some snow melt at the root surface, conifers can actually suck up some of that water and photosynthesize and upregulate their photosynthesis and store sugars. Whereas deciduous trees, once they enter dormancy, that's it. They don't have leaf material. Sycamores are the one exception. Their bark is actually a little bit green because they actually have chlorophyll in their bark, so they can actually photosynthesize a tiny bit in the winter. But for the most part, deciduous trees, that's it. Once their leaves fall, they're entering dormancy. They're not worried about photosynthesizing. Whereas conifers, they can photosynthesize throughout the entire year. So even though they have lower photosynthetic rates, they have several more months of photosynthesis. Onto this term, we have niche overlap. So we learned about what an ecological niche is. A niche is a series of different axes, abiotic and biotic axes that permit an organism to live. So niche overlap occurs when two organisms use the same resource or other environmental variables. So let's just say that this green is conifer trees and the blue are deciduous trees, and you have different species of conifer trees and different species of deciduous trees. So they're going to have different requirements, right? Because they're biologically just different organisms. However, they overlap their niches, right? So here we have this niche overlap. And where you see niche overlap, you see competition. So competition, again, is a negative species interaction. Organisms do not want to compete, right? So next I'm going to talk about species of temperate forests. We should know that there is a wide array of different mammals and birds. You have higher plants, which are vascular plants, the conifers and deciduous trees, the broadleaf hardwoods that I talked about make up higher plants. Any flower that you see is vascular. Those are all higher plants. You have long-lived species, and you have species that just complete their life cycle in 1 year, called ephemerals. Besides vascular plants, also known as higher plants, you have lower plants, these non-vascular plants that tend to dominate as well in these ecosystems. So mosses, liverworts, quillworts, plants that do not have true vascular tissues. So they do well too. They're amphibians, which are going to be supported by moist conditions in these regions, like the frogs, toads, and different salamander species. There is a multitude of insects as well as a wide array of different fungi. So here's some of the diversity that I've seen. Lower plants like mosses do really well. This is actually a plant. This is called a Indian ghost pipe, Monotropa uniflora, and this is a really interesting parasite. So this parasitic plant, it actually steals nutrients through mycorrhizae that's associated with this tree here. So trees associate with mycorrhiza, which is the fungi that supplies them with nutrients. This plant somehow tricks the fungus to give them sugars that their host plant, this tree, actually sent to the fungus. So really interesting parasitic plant. You can again find these even in Chestnut Ridge. I find them throughout these temperate forests. Here is a stand of red pines. Here is a unfurling fern. Now I'm going to get into some specific temperate biomes that I myself have encountered. I want us to learn about the Adirondacks, which is this amazing state park that is absolutely massive. It's like almost 1/4 of New York State. Interestingly enough, the Adirondacks is larger than Yellowstone and Yosemite combined. So right in our own backyard, we have this nature preserve that is really, really amazing. And here we have these deciduous forests, these mixed deciduous forests. So earlier this year, right before the semester, I went on a trip to the Adirondack Mountains. We went hiking, and we hiked up this really cool mountain. It was around 4,000 feet up, and just super fun. Really beautiful weather, a nice little recharge before we all took on this semester. Now these pictures I'm showing you are from the same hike, and as we started our journey, as we traversed from the lowest elevation, there were grasses, right? And as we moved up in elevation, there was deciduous trees. And then further up, there was deciduous mixed forests. And then finally, you get into just conifers, right? These needle-bearing trees. Here's a cedar, which have more like scale-like leaves rather than needle-like leaves. We have cedar, and you have these different spruce trees. So the higher you go up, you see these different species assemblages. And then at the very top, you get these mosses and lichen. So these are reminiscent of tundra biomes. So what exactly am I getting at? I'm getting at the term vertical zonation, right? I experienced vertical zonation firsthand, from the bottom of the grasses to the deciduous forest, to the mixed deciduous forest, to the just straight up conifer forest, all the way up to tundra-like biomes that are dominated by mosses and lichen. So really, really cool. Absolutely love it. If you haven't been to the Adirondacks, definitely check that out. if you don't have the means to get to the Adirondacks, maybe, just maybe, you can go to Zoar Valley. So Zoar Valley is less than an hour away. If you're, I'm talking about, I live like 10 minutes away from Buff State. So if you live around Buff State, you're not too far away from Zoar Valley. It's definitely a day, you can easily get there in a day, hike around for 3 hours and come back and be happy and fulfilled with nature. So Zoar Valley is just incredible. Me and my advisor, my friend and advisor at Buffalo State, which I'll show you a picture of in the next slide, Dr. Robert Warren, we went on an expedition to find this old growth forest. And we found it, and I have since brought other students of mine to show them this amazing place. So Zoar Valley, also known as the Grand Canyon of the East. So really cool. And to get to this secret old growth forest, you have to cross the actual valley twice. You have to cross two streams. So you can actually only get to the old growth forest in the driest summer months because the current is too strong otherwise. A little tidbit of information. Many trees on cliff faces you can't ever log these trees for many reasons. They kind of grow randomly and they get all gnarled up, so they're not good timber and they're really hard to get to. So not particularly these trees, but if you ever go to Niagara Falls, the Niagara Escarpment has the oldest trees of on the eastern side of the entire country. So right in your own backyard, there are cedar trees clinging onto cliff face that are 1,400 years old. And they're not even that big. These trees that are clinging onto these cliff faces, some of them are like this. So you take this special device, you drill a hole in them, and then you can count the tree lines. And researchers 20 years ago first did this with these trees, and they were astounded that they were counting 1,400 lines, which represents a new year of growth. So really, really crazy. So I got interested, once I learned about that, I got interested in all different cliff face trees. I really, really like studying old growth forests. So what exactly is an old growth forest? Well, an old growth forest is a forest that has not been logged in a really long time. So a virgin old forest is a forest that has never been logged. And this actual forest in Zoar Valley that me and my advisor, Dr. Robert Warren, we found is actually a virgin old growth forest. So the trees that you see in front of you, some of them are actually older than the first colonizers of Western New York. So actually there's evidence of 500-year-old hemlock trees and 450-year-old tulip poplars. So this is the largest tulip poplar. It might be the largest tulip poplar in New York State. It was absolutely massive. This individual is likely to be 400 plus years old. Absolutely massive. And there are several reasons why an ecosystem, a deciduous forest, does not get logged. Many times, I actually touched on this, but many times if it's too hard to access, then loggers, it would be more expensive to actually go in the area and cut them down and remove them than the timber would actually be cost. So many times when you have these topography diverse places like really crazy cliff faces and stuff, there are little pockets of old growth forests that have never been logged. And because I found probably the largest tulip poplar in New York State. I wanted to give you this fact. This is a red fact. By removing the largest 1% of trees, you actually remove 50% of the above ground biomass from these ecosystems. So this has to do with a later unit, but it's an important concept to start thinking about, to begin to start thinking about. So if you take, every single tree and the 1%, the 1 percentile of the largest trees, if you remove just the largest individuals, you actually remove 50% of the above ground biomass. So the oldest, largest trees have so much carbon stored in them. The largest trees are obviously going to be some of the taller ones. They get the most access to light. They put on biomass, right? And they hold so much biomass themselves. So I think that's a really cool fact, something that you should realize. These are two different trees I found in this old growth forest, and I want to just talk about some characteristics of old growth forests. We actually have, so if you go on a walk, if you have a dog and you go on a walk today, you're going to walk by trees. Oh, shoot. Shouldn't have said that. You're going to actually walk by trees, and you can actually touch that first branch, right? You might have to jump. It might be a little bit out of your reach. It might be like 10 or 12 feet up. But here, there are no low-hanging branches. The mature trees, the first limb sometimes is even 100 feet up in the air. So this means that instead of growing out like the trees in suburbia, because there's a really huge amount of light because they're not in a closed forest, right? In a closed forest, juvenile trees, they don't worry about branching out because there's not enough light underneath the canopy. So in old growth forests, when there is a closed canopy, trees grow straight up. And then once you reach the canopy, they start branching. So in old growth forests, the first large limbs actually occur very high, right? So that is a excellent characteristic to look out for when you go on hikes. I highly encourage it. Look at how different the branching is of these canopies, right? If it branches very high, then you know that these trees matured in a forest that was closed. So if a forest gets logged, right, and juvenile trees sprout up, they're going to have all the light available to them. So they're going to branch like the trees in suburbia, right? There's going to be all these low-hanging branches and limbs. In these forests, you'd find a lot of dead standing trees, and there's been multiple studies that talk about the importance of dead standing trees. Dead standing trees allow a multitude of different organisms, from animals and birds to live in, and from fungi to feed on. And here you actually have these reishi mushrooms. These are medicinal mushrooms. And you can see all these insects. So this is actually an unknown interaction. I found this on a dead log in these old growth forests. What exactly are these beetles doing? Well, they might be, it looks like they're mating here, and they might be laying their eggs actually in these reishi mushrooms. And other organisms do this, and once their offspring hatch, they are covered in fungal spores, and then they bore into trees, and then they actually spread the fungal spores. So really cool interaction there. Let's see here if I can get this right. Boom. Okay. So the importance of dead standing trees is imperative. Now, the next thing I want to show you, I actually brought a drone to Zoar Valley here. And I'm going to actually show you how isolated this old growth forest is. So I'm actually going to fast forward a little bit. I was checking out some of these trees on the cliff face. And then I flew up. And here we go. So this is this isolated old growth forest. And I love how the forest kind of spills over that cliff face there. And this forest, this tiny little isolated forest here, has never been logged, right? And I love how you can see the dead individual trees without leaves there. So I think this is just so cool. This tiny little pocket that's never been logged, containing 450-year-old tree species right in your own backyard. This is actually there weren't many conifers. There were hemlocks. So this is actually a mixed deciduous trees, but definitely dominated by hardwoods, different deciduous trees. Really, really cool. And there is actually, now that I'm looking at this, there's really high-tech LiDAR that fly over different ecosystems, and they could actually, so they take with really complex algorithms, these satellites can actually identify species from this height. So you can actually do like an analysis of the species composition from a high altitude like this. And you could see the encroachment of different farmlands and human interaction over here. But Zoar Valley, the surrounding region here, is protected, and even more so, logging did occur 100 years ago, and even less than that, but these loggers could not even get to this isolated area that I spend a lot of my time at. So if you guys are interested in hiking with me, let me know. You can email me. I do go with students. So let me know there. Oh, and by the way, this is actually one of my students, Robert, and then this is my lab mate, Chloe, who is working on a really cool ant project. As I showed you that drone video, I actually have a drone video of the Adirondacks as well. So you can see that, the barren rock is kind of reminiscent of more of like an alpine organization of species. And this high up, now the Adirondacks, this is higher in elevation than Zoar Valley, so you're going to see more conifer trees. But the Adirondacks, the area of unperturbed biome is absolutely beautiful and really, really humbling to see this protected mixed deciduous forest. So here's some more drone photography and videography. Really, really beautiful, really awesome. Definitely go check out these temperate biomes. So love that. Cool. Here's a little figure for leaf identification. Again, even if you can't go hiking, if you have a dog and you're on a WALK, I feel like he knows how to spell that word now. All right, bro. Check out this leaf identification figure and try to identify the trees that you walk by. Black walnut is, is going to be around, if you're by a bike path, you probably find some black walnuts. American elms, sycamore leaves, eastern cottonwoods are usually going to be a full light plant. So if really bright areas, try looking for eastern cottonwoods. There's a lot of ornamental horse chestnut trees around me. Look at birch better than the leaves. Look at the bark for birch. Tulip tree, this is what that tulip poplar leaf looks like. Almost looks like a cat face. White ash kind of looks similar to a black walnut, larger leaves. Look this over. Try and identify your local flora and another picture I wanted to show you. This is in the this is from not the Adirondacks but Allegheny State Park, and this is late spring. All the leaves are out, and I wanted to show you how dark these biomes can get, especially when they're more dominated by broadleaf trees. When the leaves do actually come out, it gets really dark, right? So that is something to take note in. And the plants, the ephemerals, the plants that finish their life cycle in 1 year, they are actually going to finish their life cycle before the larger trees leaf out, because it's just simply too dark to photosynthesize and get all the carbon and to produce the sugars you need to carry out your life cycle. The diversity of fungi in our area is absolutely staggering, from purple Cortinarius to green russulas to Cosaina, these cup fungi, to bird nest fungi, to marasmius species, to ink caps. So ink caps, they go through this really cool process called deliquescence. They literally melt, which is really cool. And when they melt, they kind of curl up, and that curling up actually exposes their gill surface, and they are allowed to release more spores. Different species. This is the hellbender. I actually did a project on the hellbender salamanders, the second largest salamander species on the planet. Really cool in our own backyard. They can only live in really pristine water. So if there's any runoff from agriculture, that runoff will actually kill the hellbenders in that area. You have this toad that had some fuzzies on its head. I thought was funny. I took a picture of that. A barred owl, just one of the many bird species. And for all you people with arachnophobia, here's this giant spider, this orb weaver. Really cool. So again, biodiversity. We actually know what biodiversity is, the variety of living things, but there are actually 3 different kinds of biodiversity that are essential to preserve ecological system and functions. So genetic diversity is a measure of the variety of versions of the same genes within an individual species. So you want a large genetic diversity within a species living in a biome. If you don't have genetic diversity, then one pathogen can come by and wipe out everything, right? So genetic diversity increases your resilience and resistance to these different disturbances. Species diversity describes the number of different kinds of organisms within a community or ecosystem. That is the diversity that we focused on. And then ecological diversity refers to the richness and complexity of a biological community. So those are 3 different types of diversity. Now, obviously, threats of diversity include extinction events that we went over thoroughly, but also human impacts. And this was coined by E.O. Wilson, the acronym HIPPO, which stands for habitat destruction, invasive species, pollution, population of humans, and over-harvesting. So all of these are critical human impacts that reduce the functioning of ecosystems everywhere. So we're going to go through these, starting with habitat destruction. Between 1600 and 1850, human activities appear to have eliminated 2 or 3 species per decade. However, in the past 150 years, the extinction rate has increased to thousands per decade. Over the past 10,000 years, humans have transformed billions of hectares of former forests and grasslands to croplands, cities, roads, and other uses. Sometimes we destroy habitat as a side effect of resource extraction, such as mining, dam building, and indiscriminate fishing methods. So here is a depiction of habitat destruction, the historical decrease in forested area in southern Wisconsin. In 1831, these are all growth forests, right? These are unperturbed forests. There are 500-year-old hemlocks here. In 1882, right? So 50 years later, you get this total cookie cutter effect of this massive deforestation effort. 1902, even more deforestation and development. And then in 1950, look at how tiny these pockets are. Now, this didn't just occur in Wisconsin. This occurred on a global scale. So the fact that we have the Adirondacks in New York is quite amazing. So the best example of habitat fragmentation is the creation of new roads and highways. Because think, you're on a road, on your way to work, that road just keeps going. Animals can't go around the road. Animals have to cross the road. And we know that term roadkill. So these barriers actually cause fragmented, tinier habitats. As a result, because of habitat fragmentation, there's going to be less genetic diversity, and these isolated populations have a higher risk of mortality over time. Throughout Europe, they actually have these kind of passageways. They call them ecological corridors that connect ecosystems, nearby ecosystems, across roads, right? So that is something I hope the United States starts to adopt more, developing these ecological corridors. Some argue that actually increases roadkill around the area, but there needs to be some middle ground. There needs to be a way for organisms to cross safely. Maybe it'll take a few hundred years for certain populations to realize these corridors, but fragmentation is a big issue that we see. As soon as you're on a highway, that highway does not end, right? Organisms cannot go around a highway. They cross, and as a result, you see this fragmentation, right? And you can actually see these tiny little fragments here as it is. So the overview of this lecture, hopefully, are that temperate forests are extremely dynamic biomes as shifting seasonality alters biotic and abiotic interactions on an annual basis. Human encroachment on these biomes impose a serious threat against biodiversity and ecological functioning. And if you do live in New York State, there is a bounty of undisturbed forests that you can find and explore for yourself. So, again, I mentioned this earlier. If you are interested in going on a hike with me, you can either comment on the bottom of this video or send me an email. We can, do this, social distancing. We can remain 6 feet apart in nature. If you have your own means of transportation, that is. So let me know if you're interested in going on a hike. I haven't been on one in like a month and a half because I've been so busy with school. But if you are interested, let me know, and I would love to meet up and find some cool species interactions with you. So hopefully you guys like this lecture. Keep doing your homework. Keep doing well. Many of you who have made it this far are not only doing okay, but are doing really, really well. So it really shows. I appreciate you guys. Hopefully you guys, again, remain happy and healthy, and have a good rest of your day, and I will catch up with you later. Bye, guys.